Hi, everybody. I am Gabriel Santos, Collections Manager and Outreach Coordinator for the Raymond Alf Museum of Paleontology. Bad to the backbone, you mean?
Okay.
Oh, wait, sorry, hold on.
Once.
We are having a tech issue.
Moment.
Uh, can you talk now, Brittany?
Hello,
HoaiNam?
everybody. Can you hear me now? It sounds like we had some tech issues.
And me.
Okay, I think they can hear you now.
Oh,
Okay, cool.
right. Sorry, everybody. You will be subjected to my voice once again. So let's go. Let me go back and just reintroduce HoaiNam Bui, our PhD candidate from McGill University. Again, thank you for joining us. We are very excited to learn all about bird spines. So yeah, let me go ahead and tell you a little bit more about our speaker. She is a third-year PhD student from the Redpath Museum at McGill University. Her research focuses on macroevolutionary patterns within Archosauria through the integration of the fossil record with development, comparative anatomy, and phylogenetic methods. And she makes a really punny talk title. Awesome. So if anybody has questions for HoaiNam, go ahead and put them in the chat. We will get to as many of them as possible during our Q&A session after her presentation. And whenever you're ready, HoaiNam, take it away.
Cool. So is my screen shared now? Okay. But yeah, so my talk is called Bad to the Backbone, a look into the evolution and development of the bird spine. So again, thanks for the really nice introduction, but I will also talk a little bit about my path to science and my path to being where I am today. So I got my Bachelor of Arts in Geology from Macalester College in St. Paul, Minnesota. When I first went to university, I actually had no idea what I wanted to study. I knew I really liked science. I knew I really liked biology, and really, I just kind of was like, oh, I guess I'll pre-med, I guess. But then I realized that was probably really not the best fit for me. But I took one geology class, and I was honestly instantly hooked. And um, so with this geology class, I was like, this is it. This is what I'm going to do. And I was able to have two really amazing advisors at Macalester who really just took me under their wing and gave me all of these opportunities. So I did a ton of field work. I had multiple research opportunities, and it really just, they helped me and shaped my like critical thinking skills and everything. So I ended up working for them for a year after I graduated as a lab technician doing histology work. And when I presented some of my research at an SVP meeting in Calgary, I actually met my current advisor, Hans Larson. So I am now currently a third year PhD student in the Larson lab at McGill University in Montreal. But outside of my research and outside of my work, I really love climbing. I really love accessibility and diversity in outdoors. Those are just really big passions of mine. But also, since COVID, I've really done a lot of cooking and I've done a lot of reading. So that's just kind of who I am as like my short little blurb. But I'll also kind of cover my research. They're really just super broad in terms of research interests, but they fall within this theme of macroevolution, specifically in Archosauria. So Archosauria is a group that contains all living crocodilians and birds, but also the ones that we all love, dinosaurs. And so working with my advisor, Hans, I've been really given this amazing opportunity to work in a lab where our focus is really just in these large-scale evolutionary patterns, and the process of evolutionary transformations, like what's driving them, how are they shaped. And all of the students in my cohort, we all also have these really different specialties and focuses, but we managed to collaborate on all these different projects, integrating the fossil record, anatomy, genetics, phylogenetics, evolution, and so on and so forth. My focus has mostly been on the dinosaur to bird transition, but I'm also kind of dipping my toes towards the crocodilomorph evolution and development as well. So every summer, we also, except for this past one due to COVID, we also run a field course through McGill in Saskatchewan and Alberta. And this is in the ancestral and traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy. So the Kainai, Piikani, Siksika, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation and Stoney Nakoda First Nation. But our efforts really focus on the grasslands in Saskatchewan and mainly in Dinosaur Provincial Park in Alberta. We teach students a ton of different field techniques like how to measure section, mapping fossil beds, sieving and identifying microfossils, but also jacketing fossils. This is drone footage from the field season of 2019, and we brought 8 students with us, and most of them were actually women, which was really exciting for me, and it was just a super empowering experience and really refreshing compared to most male-dominated field seasons. But the fossils that we end up collecting in the field actually come back with us to the Redpath Museum in downtown Montreal, where they're prepped in-house, and some students end up conducting research on them as well. So while my research isn't directly connected to this amazing 3 weeks every summer, I really love this education aspect of it, and bringing students and seeing them go from, oh, this is my first time camping, to, oh, I can identify like a fossil compared to a rock. I can canoe across a really like rapid river, and there's all these skills that really just like come together. But I guess I'll talk about my research a little bit more now. So an aspect of my research is really on the origin of birds and the dinosaur to bird transition. So really looking at this transition from terrestrial or land to aerial locomotion, so flight. This transition is known as one of the major evolutionary events in vertebrate history, and it occurred approximately 150 million years ago, but by the early Cretaceous, so around 130 million years ago, it had already diversified as a major factor in Mesozoic ecosystems. This transition really encompasses the early radiation of the most taxonomically and ecologically diverse groups of vertebrates today. And a lot of questions has been asked and also still can be asked about it because of its extensive fossil record. But really, most importantly, that kind of encompasses this big transformation and transition is probably the origin of powered flight. So powered flight is when an animal is able to propel itself through the air. So when an bird can beat their wings to fly, that is powered flight. And this ability, it actually only occurs 3 times in vertebrate history. So it occurs in birds, and bats, and pterosaurs. And powered flight is really a major factor in why birds are so evolutionarily successful. And it's a reason behind the incredible species richness that we see today. So in Neornithes, or that this is a group that includes all living birds, it was estimated that we have about 9,000 to 10,000 species known, but really there was a study in 2016 that says it's probably more close to 18,000, which is really wild. And there's also hundreds of fossil specimens as well. And birds are really the most specious extant tetrapod clade, as it represents almost 20% of known vertebrate diversity. And really, so this success is driven and supported by these major changes in anatomy. And as we transition from our bipedal theropod dinosaurs and ancestors, we see these major musculoskeletal changes with the radiation of birds. And we see this drastic reduction in body size. We have elongated forearms, increased brain volumes, a keeled sternum that you see in blue. It's almost like a sail shape on the sternum, as well as perching feet. And we also see this loss of an elongate tail, which is generally studied, but less studied than the entire axial column as a whole, which is what I really want to talk about today. And so I put on the right a diagram of a normal human backbone. And so our spines are really made up of individual bones called vertebrae. And these vertebrae in their specific positions all have a certain name, so that relates to their function as well. So in the red, we see cervical vertebrae or our neck vertebrae. In the blue, we see thoracic, and these are the vertebrae that have the ribs attached to them. And then lumbar, our lower back, sacrum, and coccyx. In reptiles and dinosaurs, we generally see the same distribution, but instead of the coccyx, we see the tails. So a bunch of unfused vertebrae or caudal vertebrae. And in birds, we see something else happen completely. So we see our general cervical vertebrae in red, shown here, but then in a lot of birds, actually, we see that in the thoracic vertebrae or the rib-bearing vertebrae, a lot of their vertebrae actually end up fusing together. So this is really thought to act as like a brace for the shoulder girdle, and it's supposed to add rigidity during flight, and it's called a notarium. And something similar happens within the lumbar and sacral vertebrae, where all of the lumbar vertebrae and the sacral vertebrae end up fusing together into what's called a synsacrum. And this is also thought to increase rigidity for flight and support the backbone for landing and takeoff. And in addition to these fusions and then the loss of a really long tail, we also see a few individual caudal vertebrae, but then also at the end, this little plow-shaped bone called a pygostyle. And so this is the fusion of all of the most, like at the end, like these little vertebrae that fuse together. And we see this drastic decrease in the number. And yeah, so then we see that, so the pygostyle actually acts as like a rudder for a lot of birds that swim. It acts as a brace for the flight feathers, but then also acts and helps with maneuverability during flight. But overall, we see this huge reduction in separate vertebral elements or individual bones through regional fusions and units with a complex function. And so what I studied is I wanted to really look into how those specific regions and fusions in the spine developed. And so I started with chicken embryos. They're super easy to incubate and access. They are a model system, and acquiring their eggs is really easy, and being able to watch their development happen outside of the mother is a big reason as to why they are a model system, and a lot of research goes into them. So the genetic mechanisms are also really well known, and I wanted to see how this anatomical development of the backbone in the chicken basically occurred in conjunction with the genes that pattern them as well. And a quick overview of Hox genes is that Hox genes are a set of genes that specify the specific regions of the body from head to toe. So in the chicken and a crocodile, the expressions of the genes and the timing of those genes mark and determine the boundaries of where the specific vertebrae may form. So they kind of determine the identity of the vertebrae at the specific location in the body. Next. Okay. And so what I did was I created a developmental series of the chicken starting from when I began to see the backbone forming as cartilage. And I basically extracted all these embryos at their specific developmental points, and I brought them through this process of clearing and staining. And so what I did was I cleared their flesh and their muscles to look white under white light. And I also stained their cartilage blue and then their bones red/purple. The stain was red, but then it all actually turned out purple, but I think it was because of the blue. So this way, I was actually able to just track how the backbone develops. I was able to see when these vertebrae go from looking all the same throughout the backbone to really specialize and have these special anatomies that are all related to specific functions. And so I was really able to map the timing of chondrification, ossification, and fusions. So chondrification is shown in the light gray, and it's basically the formation of cartilage. Ossification is the formation of bone, and that's how it's reflected in this dark gray black. And then the fusions are this joining together of the elements and really just this decrease of individual vertebral units. So really what we find that at the beginning, we see the chicken beginning with 45 discrete vertebrae. We also see that the lumbosacrals fuse first. So you can see here, there's like a block of fusions that are occurring between stages 30 and 35. And that's also having early fusion of the pygostyle as well. By the end of ossification, which is further on, so we have from left to right is youngest to oldest. And as we get to pre-hatchling, we actually are already ending up with 25 segments, so individual segments. So we go from 45 discrete vertebrae to 25 individual segments where we have these a fusion within this thoracic vertebrae, a fusion of the lumbosacrals, and a fusion of the caudal vertebrae. And so the adult chicken actually has 24 segments, and so one extra vertebrae is added within the lumbosacrals down here. So then we looked at the Hox genes expression within the chicken, and we find that there is some correlation, but it doesn't explain everything. So we see Hox A5, which is in the light blue, has this correlation to a delayed conjugification, but like an earlier ossification. And then in Hox A7, this boundary correlates with our thoracic fusions. But you can also see that our Hox genes actually don't explain why there's these two separate fusion regions within the lumbosacrals. So there's something else going on here, and it may be another patterning mechanism. We don't actually know where it comes from. But when we look at the fossil record, we really started looking at, we just started at the first bird, Archaeopteryx, 150 million years old. And when we're looking at the axial column of Archaeopteryx, it has a completely unfused vertebral column. We have 5 fused sacral vertebrae, and then this gives us a total of 46 segments. And then when we go to the next fossil birds, in terms of time, we start at 120 million years ago, and we have Johalornis and Sapiornis. So these are really similar in age. And Johalornis on the left is really similar to Archaeopteryx with 49 individual units, but with the addition of a few more caudal vertebrae. However, with Sapiornis, this marks the origin of the clade Pygostylia, and this is all the birds with the pygostyle. And they have the shortened tail and the pygostyle, and the segment count actually drops really dramatically to 31. And so we took a bunch of other fossil birds and then mapped it against the axial counts of a modern chicken. So this plot is about. And so with our white dotted line, we have the vertebral counts in the developing modern chicken, but then we've also mapped the axial units of fossil birds against it. And so what we're seeing is mapping phylogenetically, the evolution of vertebral units really drops dramatically at Pygostylia. So you go from Archaeopteryx and Johalornis here, and then you drop dramatically at Sapiornis and Confuciusornis there. And then this number increases with Ornitherae, which is around Hesperornis, and you have this advent of higher cervical counts before reducing again further on with the origin of Notaria that ends up, or the Notarium, which is the fused thoracics, which ends up being independently evolved many times. And so generally we see the fact that the development and phylogenetic trends in axial reduction really just appear to generally parallel one another. And in both cases, we see this expanded synsacrum and pygostyle really just coming up first and leading all the other patterns from there. And so in terms of key takeaways, we really find that the development and evolution of the modern bird is generally parallel with each other through the loss of individual units in the backbone. We see the dinosaur-to-bird transition is accompanied by the loss of an elongate tail, the fusion of tail vertebrae into a pygostyle, and a broadly fused synsacrum, and sometimes the notarium. But generally, we see this overall decrease in individual units within the backbone. We also see these independent region of fusions that are a lot more complex than we expected. For example, the region that I mentioned before within the lumbosacrals that had 2 separate fusion blocks, we know that this is most likely worthy of follow-up comparisons because it's not driven by Hox patterning. And we also see that this initial fusion of the 7 synsacrals may have homology to the 7 fused synsacrals present in a lot of non-ornithine pygostylians in the Cretaceous. And while there's some Hox axial expression patterns that are correlated, it doesn't explain everything. So yeah, and why should we care? I think birds are really cool, but really so is their evolutionary history. And understanding that evolutionary history and where they come from is really important into understanding how to study and understand them now. So their history shapes all aspects of their biology, their success, and their responses to environmental change. With birds having such a long history, and there's a lot of data that can be utilized, so we can use integration as a means of understanding that history. With the extensive fossil record, a ton of developmental data, and the anatomy, we can use all of these things to basically put these different types of data together like a puzzle and really just getting a bigger picture of what's going on. But most importantly, can we use history to shape today's thinking? Birds are huge players in our modern ecosystems, so understanding how they got to be here can shape ideas behind conversation and how our actions can really affect their responses to their environments as well. So when we're understanding their history, we can see, for example, how they responded to big extinction events, how these massive changes in morphology and their skeleton allowed them to really flourish. So maybe we can understand those modern extinction events. So yeah, that's it.
Awesome. Thank you, HoaiNam.
Thanks.
And you're right. Birds are really cool.
That was awesome.
Birds are really cool. I actually didn't know much about them either. When I came into my program, I was very geology focused and interested in like this integration of geology and biology. And then I like learned about their backbone and I was like, what? So that's what happened.
That's a cool story. I'm kind of the opposite. I went from biology to geology, but like I think you did a really good job of like summing up how paleontology is this mix of geology and biology when we look at like the past. And I also think you really did a great job at the end of like talking about like why paleontology is important, like looking at the past.
Yeah.
What do you say? The past is the key to understanding the present, kind of thing.
Yeah,
and
I
you
think
did a
sometimes
great
it's
job of
important to get a
talking
little
about
lost.
that.
Oh, sorry.
Oh no, I was just going to say, like, I think it's important to explain to people, like, well, why do you study prehistoric birds? Like, what can we glean from that? You know, what's the reason that we go out into these places, dig up bones, bring them back, and study them? And so I think you did a really good job with that.
Yeah, thanks.
Alrighty. We had lots of good questions from our chat today. So let me go ahead and go through. I did see somebody who's like, "Oh, Mermaid Lab said I'm being pulled to the mammal side of the force." That's what we like to hear. Okay, so this is from Jared asking, "What specimens did your team excavate in 2019?"
We probably our biggest find was a hadrosaur femur, and it was about like 1 point something. It was pretty big, and it was probably one of like the bigger femurs that we found in Dinosaur Provincial Park. and it was really heavy. It was like covered in ironstone, and it took us like 3 days to just kind of like get at it and really. And then afterwards, we like when we jacketed it, we just had to like bring it out with a sled, and then like canoe it upriver. It was like a really big.
So cool.
Yeah, but it was really cool. It was like a really awesome way to really see a fossil from. They had found it the year before, but they didn't excavate it until this year. So we had taken it out, and it was just like this whole process. And the students were so stoked, and they like really loved it. They were like, "Whoa!" Out! Like it was really cool to see.
I love those kind of field stories, especially when you're like, for students especially, because it's like those are the moments that really get someone to just know like, this is what I want to do.
Yeah, and like watching them, like everything that they had done, like we had students who had never, like they'd never camped before, and they were like there's no running water, like no electricity, and then by the end, they were like, yeah, like we do this and this, and you're like, yay. It was really cool.
Alrighty. This question is from Lucas. Since the pygostyle is like a rudder, do the feathers anchor to the bones?
So there's actually so there are these things called retritial bulbs, and there are these like sacs of like fat and like other muscular tissue, but that's where the retritial bulbs are attached to the pygostyle, and then that's where the feathers like are kind of like controlled from there. Yeah.
Okay. And I do just want to point out, thanks to J Rob in the chat, pygos are stylin' is my new favorite phrase.
Thanks, J Rob.
Yeah, that's my new favorite. Let's see. This is from Jared again. Is there more of that hadrosaur to go with the femur to go back for? Is there more of that dinosaur waiting out in the field?
No, there's not, unfortunately. I think this was just like a pretty lucky find of having this like full femur. But generally we see they're kind of like all spread out because it was like in a river channel, and you have these dinosaurs that kind of end up like getting decomposed and then spread across the landscape. And I think there is some full skeletons, but I actually have never seen like a full skeleton in the field, like full. But maybe one day. That'd be pretty sick.
That's like the dream whenever you're out, right? Like, okay, this is going to be the time when I overturn this rock and there's going to be something beautiful there. I'm going to like remove this little area, and all of a sudden I found the skull I've been hoping to find forever.
I know. Yeah, or like you're like, oh, I'm digging into the rock, and it's like, it has to keep going. It has to keep going. And then most of the time it doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But sometimes I guess you can be really lucky.
Yeah, sadly, the idea of that classic Jurassic Park notion of finding a complete skeleton in the desert doesn't always pan out often at all.
I have a question for you, HoaiNam, really quick. So, when you were studying kind of like the genetics portion of your PhD work, when you kind of went from geology to this biology section, did you feel like you had to kind of start over? Because I know a lot of people fear or kind of have like that fear of like, oh, I'm only in biology, I can't do paleontology, geology stuff, and vice versa. What was that like for you?
It definitely was a learning curve. I was super overwhelmed at the beginning. I was like, what's a gene? But at the end of the day, it was almost like, so with the PhD and like your opportunities as a graduate student in general, like everything is just focused on how much information you want to consume and how much like learning that you're like wanting to do. And I think what was so great about entering the biology program was that I felt, I guess, like, yes, overwhelmed at first, but also like, oh, this is so cool. I'm learning like all of these things that can be applied to understand the fossil record as well. And I think like as I was like diving deeper and deeper into it, it just all became this like new language that I almost like kind of also got used to. Like at the beginning, I was like, I don't know what any of these words mean. I can't like read a paper, but now it's like, oh yeah. But I think it was really just a matter of like kind of like sticking with it and also asking for help. Like there were a ton of students like within my program as well who were like more like specialized in development, and they were like, yeah, like we can sit down and talk, and they let me ask like dumb questions. They let me ask like anything. So it was super nice. And so now I'm really happy about where I am, because now I'm like, I love rocks and I love biology.
You can do
Awesome.
both.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's true. When I went from biology in my undergrad to geology, and I had to take a year of quote deficiencies, which I hate that word still, but it was basically taking 1 year of undergrad courses. But it was awesome because I learned literally how to read stratigraphy. I learned about the different kinds of rocks, and then I started to make connections to biology of like, oh, all this stuff could teach us about the bio side and the environmental stuff. And it was just like you said, like I got used to another language, but it all just connected and made me so excited to learn about new things.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's so cool.
Yeah, and I mean, I switched disciplines completely from my English degree to geology and environmental science. So, yeah, you can definitely, I think, you can, if you put your mind to it, you can learn any sort of discipline that you're interested in. Just takes time and effort.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. This question is from Koi asking, so I take it that hadrosaur isn't that common in that area that you were digging in. What do you guys usually find there?
So hadrosaur is actually really common, but but in terms of finding a really big bone like that, it's also less common. But we find like hadrosaur teeth all the time. There's a bunch of different bird specimens sometimes that are also found. We find ankylosaur, nodosaur, champsosaur, and it's really everything. It's actually one of the more specious like areas that you can find. So it's like 28 like square kilometers or 30 square kilometers, and then you have like so many different species: reptiles, crocodiles, alligators, so many turtles. Find a lot of turtle. But yeah, so you see just like hadrosaurs, I would say, are pretty common, and like the different kinds as well, and a lot of theropod as well. So you can find like little theropod teeth pretty easily.
You know, we talk a lot about so far on the show of like what people find in the field, but like I don't think we ever talk about like what it takes to prepare for the field. So like what do you like, what's it like for you to prepare to go out there, like, you know, because you are out there for like a few weeks or even like a month sometimes, right? So like what is it like for you?
So we have a joint permit to collect with the University of Alberta, and so um, our like our labs basically kind of coincide and have like their field seasons where we organize like a huge water tank to be like taken to the field, and we have there's a really nice rancher that lets us like camp on his land, and then we basically take canoes and then cross the river into the park itself to prospect. And so for us, it is a lot. It's like trucks and a lot of in terms of organization and like getting. But then we do like a huge Costco run where we just like
Classic.
have like huge Costco run, and then we have all of our gear. So we set up a big tent where it's like a kitchen tent, and then a gear tent, and then we basically put it up, and then organize all of the food and all of the meals and everything like that, and then yeah, it's a pretty big undertaking, but there's a lot of people involved that like, and it's been happening, so it's almost like kind of a well-oiled system where things just kind of work and you have like your spots and yeah. But the big Costco run is my favorite. I think it's so entertaining when we leave with like 4 huge carts full of food and but yeah.
You
I
gotta
always
love
love that part.
that pre-fossil field work Costco run.
Oh,
The hard part of
and
that is like
everyone's
trying
like,
not to eat all
what
the
is
snacks.
happening?
That's true.
It's so true, but we do buy a lot of snacks. We're like very well prepared. We like make a huge list and we're like, this is what we want to eat all the time, and this is really good for snackage.
Yep. I remember like usually when we go, because we don't bring like a lot of like more fresh foods or whatever, because we're like out in an isolated
Yeah.
campsite for like a couple weeks or
Yeah.
more, and then so we eat like a lot of like macaroni and cheese and things that we could easily prepare. But one day we managed to make like a peanut butter carrot salad because we had some left over, and I just remember like this is the best thing I've eaten in like weeks. It's so good, and I just like I came back and
Peanut
tried to
butter
make it again.
carrot?
Yeah, I was like, what? Why?
Food tastes different in the fields. I will maintain
It's
this.
so different. Yeah.
It tastes different in the
We
fields.
made
Things taste different after you've spent all day digging in the dirt.
so true. And we made a in one of our earlier stops, we always stop at like the KPG boundary. And so we always like collect a little bit of the ash layer. And we always make a paella with the KPG like inside. And we're like,
That's
here's
so
some
cool.
paella with a little ash.
Oh, I need to do that one day.
Is it
Yeah,
lunchtime?
everyone
It's
was
not
really
lunchtime
stoked. We're like, yeah, we're eating the extinction like border.
yet. Oh my goodness, that sounds so good. Okay. We could talk about field food forever, but there are a few more questions. What is this is from Jared. What is the defining characteristic that makes a para-avian dinosaur an actual bird versus it just being really close to or sharing a second to last common ancestor right before they diverge?
From a para-avian dinosaur to a
So I think to an actual bird. So like what's the difference between those two? Like what keeps it what makes a dinosaur like shift over to an actual bird at some point?
yeah, so we see changes in the way that their shoulder girdles also like join together. So like then also the presence of a furcula. So the furcula is like the little wishbone that you break like on Thanksgiving. And then you see changes in the digit identity or digits in terms of like the perching feet that I had mentioned earlier. And also this like loss of the elongate tail. So there's a ton of different like characteristics that are that you kind of see like scattered, but then once real bird, like the modern birds that we know, kind of all have them together in like one neat little package.
Mhm.
I wouldn't say neat, but for sure package.
Okay. All right. I'm really glad Tat asked this because if nobody did, I was going to. What's your favorite field find so far?
Oh,
I know it's a hard-hitting question.
I don't know. I feel like I just get really excited whenever we find anything, but I really love finding I really love finding teeth. Like I don't know what it is, but I just find it so thrilling whenever find like a really well preserved tooth. I think that it's like the coolest thing because you're just like, oh, this tooth like ate meat, or like you're just like this was in something's mouth. And I find that because of their mineral preservation, like they just seem so real and like so like, oh, it was like yesterday it could have been in a dinosaur's mouth. So I feel like whenever I see any kind of tooth, especially theropod tooth, I just like I'm like, oh, it's so cool.
Agreed. I love teeth.
Yeah. I love teeth as a mammal person just because like they tell you so much cool stuff, and also they're
They
just
really do.
much.
yeah, and they're just cool to look at.
They just look neat.
HoaiNam, really quick, I think I might have said the wrong place. Where exactly was your field location or the field site that you work at? I had said it was Dinosaur Provincial Park, but I think I might have misunderstood what during your talk.
No, yeah, it was
It was?
Dinosaur Provincial Park.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I was listening. Okay, good.
Yeah, you did great.
Alrighty. And here's another question that I have, since I haven't seen it asked in the chat yet. What is your favorite prehistoric animal? That question always comes up, and I feel like I have to ask it of every speaker.
I love I love sauropod dinosaurs. I think they're so weird. and I worked on them on my undergrad. So I think I have this like loyalty to all long-necked dinosaurs that are really big and don't really make a lot of sense in terms of like how they walked on land, in terms of like and how they existed in general. So that's where I like am like slightly more loyal to them than like other prehistoric animals, I think.
That's fair. Okay. Ooh, here's a very good question. This is again from Koi. Since you brought up the furcula, what specific character do you look for to decide that it belongs to a true bird and not another theropod?
Oh, interesting. Um, in terms of, I guess, in terms of, yeah, what other characteristics? I would say the furcula is definitely like a big one in terms of like a true bird versus a theropod. You would also see, um, yeah, I guess it depends on like what part of the skeleton you have, right? And so you have to like when you're looking at like say it's a theropod skeleton, you have these different characteristics versus a bird skeleton that you're using to identify, okay, like what are we looking at here? How is it like what like specific traits does it have to say, okay, like let's characterize it as a bird. But generally like for our modern birds, yeah, it's the traits that I had mentioned before, specifically this, like maybe your the fused elements in like our synsacrum, our notarium, our pygostyles, things like that, where you're kind of trying to put those puzzle pieces together and say, okay, this was what makes a bird versus this is what makes our theropod. If that makes sense.
Got it. Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. That's a very popular question in chat.
Yeah.
I think everyone's really curious about that because, like, you know, when we say things like bird versus dinosaur, I know at my museum we like to say a lot like, oh, if you like chickens, if you like eating like chicken nuggets, you like eating a dinosaur. And that, you know, we're not, it's like one of those things that can confuse people sometimes. So people's like, well, what makes a bird and what makes a dinosaur? And I think it's important that we like, when we like talk about that, to make sure people understand like it's a sliding scale almost.
Yeah.
For sure. No, exactly. And like technically birds are dinosaurs, right? So like you're kind of like, well, it's still a dinosaur, but it's just not like it's still yeah, it's just like you're like, yeah, it's the sliding scale where you're like, okay, it's just like more bird like than it was like your like OG theropod, right?
Let's see. Oh, I really like this question. This is from, and I apologize if I do not pronounce this correctly, Thien Ni. What inspired you to become a paleontologist?
Oh, that's a really nice question. I would say I think I just had really wonderful advisors. I really never thought that paleontology was something that I would really get into or like I really loved geology. I really loved, but at the end of the day I was like, well, like what kind of jobs like are there for geologists? But then with my advisors they were like, you can be a paleontologist. Like you can go to grad school and like do the things that we're doing. And I was like, oh, that sounds really cool. And so I think I think having this like mentorship aspect was just really important for me to realize like, oh, I can do this. I can think critically. I can ask these questions that maybe I didn't think I was capable of before and like really just like search for the answers like the dinosaur to bird transition, stuff like that.
Yeah, that seems to have been a common thread through our fossil Friday chats when people are asked, you know, like what inspired you to be a paleontologist? Mentorship always ends up being a really big factor.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. With that, do you what kind of sorry, I got distracted. They every Friday they start to like
Every
do lawn
Friday.
work on in front of my house. Um so
They
so what do
know.
you hope to do like after you get your PhD? Do you want to go into more kind of mentorship roles or do you want to just continue on research kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think like I really love the research aspect. I'm really like happy about this opportunity to do research, but I definitely am also like I think I would love to be like in a more teaching role, mentorship role, and considering like this is how I like got into it, and this is where like I really became passionate about it. So that's kind of what I would like to do. But in terms of, I guess, the level of like whether it's like in academia, in high school or younger, I don't think I would really mind. I think as long as I'm like getting people excited about science and like being like, yeah, like anyone can do it, and then I think I'd be pretty stoked about any of it.
Heck yeah. I mean, you do a great job of it. You're really like inspiring a lot of people in our chat today, so I think it'd be perfect for you.
Thanks, guys.
Alrighty. Let's see. So we have a couple more questions, and I think these will be the last ones that we get to. So real quick, this is just from Koi, just seeking clarification. So if I have an isolated Mesozoic furcula, I can't really tell if it's paravian or another non-avian theropod, correct? So like if you only have the isolated bone, that's going to make it really difficult to tell what you've got, right?
Right. Like you're like, okay, I know that it's from this time period because based on like where I'm finding it, and I know, but I would, yeah, definitely in terms of, but you would also, depending on the fossils that are found in the area, sometimes you can say, oh, this particular species of bird is is like really common in this area. So you can almost like infer if it's similar enough to their furculas in a sense, right? Yeah.
Got it. And then what I think will be our last question from Jared, is there a way to determine at what point in their evolution birds had lost functional use of their fingers as flexible digits?
Oh, I actually don't know the answer to this question. It's a really good question, but I definitely am not a professional on the digit function in terms of bird. So I think there's a lot of people that do a lot of research, especially on like digit identity as well. But it's definitely not my specialty, but I can definitely look into it. It'd be really cool.
Awesome.
Alrighty. Well, thank you, everybody. That was really good questions in the chat. Thank you, everybody. I think this talk inspired a lot of discussion. And thank you again to HoaiNam for joining us and telling us so much, not only about birds, but your research and your journey to being a paleontologist.
Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, we're very, very happy to have you. If folks want to like learn more about you or follow on your research, where can they go?
I guess so. I don't actually have much of an internet presence in terms of my my research, but they can always email me in terms of asking questions about my research. But I am on Instagram, but I don't post that often. So, but maybe I should probably be more internet savvy at some point in my career if I want to continue on this field of work.
It's it's up to you. Whatever you feel like doing. But either way, I think you have a great career as an educator ahead of you. So
thanks.
Well, that does it for today's episode. Thank you so much to HoaiNam for joining us, and thank you so much to everyone in our chat for keeping up on today's episode. If you like this program and want to support programs like it at the Alf Museum and the Western Science Center, you can find links on how to do that in the description below. And as always, make sure you like and subscribe to our channel for more stories from the world of paleontology. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you next week.